the 7th of July, Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, resigned as leader of the Conservative Party, starting a leadership contest that has lasted across the summer. And in a rather drawn-out process, the candidates have been whittled down to Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, who have spent several weeks trying to appeal for votes. And on Friday evening, the ballots finally closed, and tomorrow, as Parliament returns, a winner will be announced. On Tuesday, this winner will travel with Boris Johnson to Balmoral to see the Queen. Boris will officially offer his resignation, and then the incoming Prime Minister will have an audience with the Queen and be formally asked to form a new government. If Jesus was a political candidate in an election, I think we would all say his approach would be considered rather unorthodox. Rather than appeal for followers, in our passage today, he addressed the crowd, and he seems to do his absolute best at trying to put them off. Hate your family, give up your possessions, and get ready for a gruesome death. It wouldn't really launch the greatest social media campaign. It wouldn't be a catchphrase to plaster across billboards or parade on the side of a big bus, would it? Tom Wright, the former Bishop of Durham, suggests that we would be better at thinking of Jesus as the leader of a great expedition rather than a political campaign. A rescue mission up a dangerous mountain, taking medical supplies to villages that have been cut off from the rest of the world. Then his sayings have a sense of, if you want to come any further, then you'll need to leave your packs behind. Send your final postcards home and be prepared that several of us will not make it back. And Jesus, of course, was on a rescue mission, a journey from heaven to earth. And the word mission in Latin is mitiere, which corresponds to the Greek verb apostellin, which means to send. So God is a missionary God. We know God because the Father sent the Son in the power of the Spirit. And the mission of God as Creator, through Christ in the Spirit, is to bring into being, sustain, and perfect the whole creation. The mission of God as Redeemer, through Christ in the Spirit, is to restore and reconcile the fallen creation. Redemption literally means buying back, and was often used in the ancient world of slaves buying back their freedom. God redeemed the people of Israel when he bought them from slavery in Egypt to bring them to freedom in the Promised Land. And the early Christians understood redemption in the most radical way. Redemption in Christ, a rescue from the slavery of sin and death, bought by the death of Jesus. And so the church is both the fruit of God's mission, those whom he has redeemed, and the agents of God's mission, the community for whom God acts for the world's redemption. And for the Western church today, the biggest threat to being faithful in mission is probably not persecution or opposition, but arguably nominal Christianity. Shallow and non-committal faith is not going to bring about growth. These verses are uncomfortable as they challenge us to embrace an authentic faith that impacts every area of our lives. How we spend our money, how we treat our family and our friends and our neighbors and our colleagues, how we use our time, how we care for the environment, how we care for the poor. And this life is what we sometimes call discipleship. And over the next 12 weeks, we're going to be examining what disciples do. The word disciple means apprentice or pupil. It's a life of learning and formation into the likeness of Christ. In the Diocese of Liverpool, we talk about how we are called to pray, learn, and read, and that we're sent to tell, serve, and give. And we're going to be thinking a bit more about that over the next 12 weeks. True discipleship affects our character, our ethics, our values. In the urgency of the mission of God, Jesus uses stark language to those that he calls as his disciples. And there are some very uncomfortable phrases in our passage for us to examine. And we're going to look at 3 of them in particular. First one. Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. That word hate is very uncomfortable, isn't it? When we hear it, it sounds very, very harsh. Hate here in the Hebraic sense was not about opposition or emotion or malice, but about priority. Jesus must have our absolute loyalty. Our commitment to Christ is more important than even the closest human relationships that we have. More important even than our own lives. And so his next statement underlines this. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire used violence and oppression to expand their imperial rule. And the Jewish people were occupied by the Romans. And any revolutionaries were crushed. Those who rebelled against the authority of Rome faced crucifixion. And the condemned person would be forced to carry their own cross. As they carried their cross to their execution, this final humiliation was designed to show their utter submission to their masters. The call to absolute surrender is the heart of discipleship. And so Jesus uses this contemporary image of carrying the cross in his claim of absolute authority and the requirement of primary allegiance from his followers. And as the shadow of the cross intensifies in Luke's gospel, it becomes clear that this dedication even meant the willingness to follow the master to martyrdom. At the Last Supper, Peter declared, "Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death." And so to further illustrate the cost of discipleship, Jesus uses 2 parables here in our passage in Luke 14. And each parable starts with a question where Jesus presents an absurd scenario. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? As the builder lays the foundation, but is unable to finish the structure, it becomes a monument to his folly, open to the ridicule of his neighbors. In the second parable, the king who fails to gauge the strength of his opponent risks losing all of his troops. In each parable, the application of wisdom is obvious. The builder needs to ensure that he has sufficient resources before he starts. The king needs to know if he has what it takes to defeat the enemy. The call to discipleship is not something that we can respond to half-heartedly. After telling these 2 parables, Jesus makes a third statement. None of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions. To say that all Christians need to abandon all that they own would be a very rigid application of this statement that fails to get to the heart of Jesus' teaching. We are to fully submit to the authority of Jesus in every area of our lives. So that means there shouldn't be anything that we wouldn't be willing to give up. So if there are possessions that we would not part with, then we need to examine our hearts and our motivations. Are there attitudes, are there behaviors behind those attachments that we would condemn in others? The cost of discipleship means that there's nothing that's off limits. So that could be our financial security, it could be the respect of others, it could be our hopes, it could be our dreams, it could be our plans. For each of us, the call of discipleship will look differently, but it should never, ever be underestimated. The good news is that in Christ we receive far more than we could ever sacrifice. The comfort and the pleasure of this world is nothing compared to the eternal love and grace of God. Responding to the call of discipleship means trading in those things that we cannot possibly keep and that cannot ultimately satisfy us for a far greater inheritance that we cannot possibly lose. There is a cost to discipleship, yet there's also an invitation to the strongest hope, the deepest joy, the greatest fulfillment, the most authentic pattern of living, the highest adventure known to humanity.